Okay, you all good? Let's do it. Hello and welcome to the B2C Lead Generation Podcast. You're listening to the B2C Lead Gen Podcast. My name is Daniel Hopewell, here with Simon Delaney, and this is episode 100. And as we've reached that milestone, we decided it would be a good time to look back, and we're going to talk through 5 of the biggest and most important ideas we've come across in our 100 episodes. So, Simon, incredibly, we've got to 100, which seemed very unlikely when we started this, but during that time, we've spoke to many guests, people who are really leading the way in the industry and at the forefront of lead gen. So let's do exactly that. Let's pick out 5 of the most important big ideas that we've seen crop up time and time again.
Okay, sure. So it's worth noting we've just come back from Lead Gen World London last week. It was a week ago today. Wow, it seems closer, but yeah, a lot of those things are being discussed then. We've discussed a lot of them over the last 2 years on the podcast, 2.5 years nearly. And it's interesting that still we're discussing them because a lot aren't happening or are happening in different ways. So over the last 2 and a bit years, so one of them is this idea of like transparency being a buzzword. Everyone says they're transparent now, right? Like it's like the sort of term that everyone uses, and I think it's almost become a little bit lost in terms of what it actually means. So from a lead generation point of view, what we're talking about is the relationship between a lead buyer and a lead seller being completely transparent. And that involves the lead generator sharing the ads that are being used, all the landing pages, how traffic is being driven, everything that is being done to generate a lead. And it involves the lead buyer sharing all the sales documentation, making sure that the lead seller understands exactly the process that the lead goes through from a sales and marketing perspective. And that could be speed, booking, what happens next, everything. And only by doing that can you actually create a transparent process between the two sides of the coin that ultimately leads to a far better customer journey for the person who becomes a lead and far greater transparency for them, because suddenly the advert is joined up to the sales function, the landing page displays the information that comes through on the sales function, so they're in a far better position to make an informed decision rather than just like some winky wanky journey where they've got like a load of bullshit information that's non-transparent from an ad and a landing page, and it then go into a sales process that just means absolutely nothing. Or isn't related in any way to the marketing process. So this is what we're talking about with ultimate transparency. It just helps everybody in that loop, the consumer, the lead seller, the lead buyer, and it goes back in a continuous circle with the feedback that the lead buyer gives to the lead seller so they can optimize the targeting of their adverts and the audience that they're going after.
Yeah, I think transparency from the very get-go of this podcast has been very important, and it's something we've seen everyone discuss time and time again. I think as well, as we go through this, we'll work out that a lot of people have discussed this progression from old school lead gen 1.0 to something new, and transparency is without a doubt at the forefront of that. That divide, you can almost trace that. So yeah,
I think it's worth pointing out as well that and I can't remember, we haven't done a podcast for a few weeks, right? Just because of the like vortex of bank holidays that we've been wrapped up in a few other things. But when we started this podcast, like the first thing we said is we have to have this completely transparent and not just as a buzzword. As in, if we basically bullshit our way through this or say what we don't think or try and sell our own services constantly, podcasts just don't work on that perspective. So it has to be completely transparent. And the way I look at it is that as a lead buyer and a lead seller, because your relationship is so entwined with each other, you actually have nothing to lose. Like, stop thinking of the immediate gratification of just trying to like get money or get more leads, and work on the actual partnership, which, you know, creates a far better long-term process and long-term revenue effectively, and helps consumers long-term. And that's why transparency isn't a buzzword that should be used lightly. There aren't, there's only a handful of companies that are carrying out those sort of things.
Yeah. And like you say, it's one thing saying it, but it has to actually be demonstrated. I think that's the key, the key factor in that. Cool. So first idea ticked off. Transparency is more than a buzzword. Number 2, what we got?
So, I mean, we discussed this a long time ago on the podcast. I think it was like, I can't even remember. It might have been the first 10 podcasts that we did, where we might even been the first internal podcast that we did when a guest didn't show up, and we were like, we'll have to do an internal one like this. And this is the idea that lead generation companies need to become brands. And the best lead generation companies do end up becoming brands. So this has actually changed even more from when we did the original podcast. So the first podcast was to do with the greatest impact on ad spend is the size of your company or market share within a given vertical. So basically, the bigger you are, the less you spend to get more leads, to get more sales. You have far better ROI. So it would make sense for any company that buys a lot of media, i.e. lead generation companies, unless you're relying on SEO, which comes on to the second point that I'll make. Their ultimate aim should be to build a brand, because their advertising costs go down, their leads go up, and the trust that they generate becomes consumer side, not just client side they're working with. And the benefit is not only the ad cost going down so they make more profit because they generate more revenue, but the partnerships they have with advertisers become more like affinity partnerships. Think of like comparison sites for a great example. They ultimately are really like lead generators, right? But when you're an advertiser going onto a comparison site, guess what? The relationship is kind of reversed from what a lead generator to an advertiser is. The advertiser is actually, and not that you necessarily want to go like weak and strong, they're actually in a potentially weak position. It's the comparison site that holds all the cards because they have all the customers trusting them. And lead generators are absolutely poised to create this sort of brand because of the impartiality, which is their greatest weapon. And hardly any of them use it. And if you use it effectively, that is how you create a brand for consumers, by being a middleman, using your impartiality and building lots of relationships with lead buyers and offering massive value via resources, information, and resonating with the consumers who will visit your brand. Now, interestingly, I was having a conversation last night with an old colleague about how AI will play into middlemen. Basically, we were talking about comparison size, middlemen, lead generators, and whatever else. So I put a LinkedIn post out about this a couple of days ago. It doesn't take a great leap of thought, this, right? To start looking at, say, ChatGPT or Bard will remove middlemen. Because when you want an answer to something that's like a non-emotive product, so let's say like life insurance, right? You have to, it's quite like a considered purchase because you have to go through financial advisors and figure out, whatever's best for you and whatever else. But imagining advertisers that are giving the life insurance policies away, providing the policies, they can create API plugins directly to something like ChatGPT, find all the information out, and it doesn't become like several quotes. If they all have plugins, it will just return the best quote based on all the information that the AI has. I think that will happen long term. In the short term, I could actually see comparison sites doing pretty well. But they'll become destinations, as in people will search the brand that they want a quote from. So your ultimate aim as a lead generator for a non-emotive product that has no brand and doesn't resonate with people and just relies on paid ads. If you want to use search, which is what most people will use for non-emotive products, you need to start working on building a brand and using impartiality as your greatest weapon for doing that. Obviously, there'll still be other ad platforms, Facebook, TikTok, native, affiliates. But if you think of like non-emotive products, like, I don't know, energy, any sort of insurance, people don't really give two shits who they're with, unless you build a brand that resonates really strong with them. But they will go to resources that they believe help them, benefit them. So I think right now it's more important than ever to work on building a brand as a lead generator. It's difficult, right? I get it. It's really difficult because you can't get off the hamster wheel of paid ads, generating leads, hitting that ROI, getting more clients and selling the leads and things. But I think to survive when you've got something like AI, which is by design impartial to stuff like this, it's going to end up eating you because you're not needed, in a sense. I mean, the funny thing is that like Google is the ultimate middleman of all. And that's the thing. That's why they have to build AI, because then their search results just get eaten and it just returns a response. Maybe with a few paid ads, but those paid ads will kind of change. They won't necessarily be what they are now. But so I think for those two reasons, that building a brand has the highest impact on ROI above anything else. This is, you can make all the tweaks that you want and other shit. The number one thing is the size of your company and the vertical it's operating in, which the impact has the greatest impact on advertising costs and the future of AI chatbots, which are like now here, and how they'll replace a lot of middlemen sitting in the market at the moment.
I think it's also, I'll just add to this, I assume people have heard other episodes, but on the off chance someone's come to this fresh, I will just clarify, when we say building a brand, there's an important distinction between what you often refer to as winky wanky bands, which you can knock up on, in 2 minutes, and an actual proper professional brand. I think this is the important thing to talk about, this degree of professionalism that we see developing amongst the lead generators, these strong brands, not these sort of very quick things that people are knocking up, just to clarify that.
Yeah, I mean, I did a talk at Lead Gen World London, which if anyone saw, I believe I cocked up slightly because about 5 minutes in, I had a sudden brain freeze, and I blamed COVID, which I've been suffering from for a few days before. But anyway, the point of that was the low barrier to entry within lead generation, right? As in, you can just suddenly come in, knock up a page on something like Unbound, set Zapier up, drive any sort of traffic from anywhere, and get someone who will buy those leads. And what it's created is this lack of professionalism, because we've almost celebrated people being able to do that as if it's that's like a good thing to be able to do. It isn't necessarily. It's just led to a really short-term approach to lead generation where proper partnerships aren't built. Partnerships dissolve really quickly. Fraud has been committed, people sending list data, yesterday's leads, whatever. And then you have companies that, there's only a handful of these like lead gen companies that have turned themselves into brand. The podcast we did on it, we talked about tom.co.uk, which was life insurance for dads, and the way that they'd positioned that and differentiated from all the other life insurance markets. And that's a huge brand now, right? I think it got bought in the end, but they've ended up sponsoring like Tyson Fury, or he's involved in their adverts. I think they're on his shorts when he fights. There's another one in the US, Lending Tree, which is, we had Bruce Cook on from Lending Tree to talk about, this move from advertising arbitrage, which is what he said everybody's doing, to actually building a brand that people search. That becomes the destination. That's so important as AI chatbots take over as a personal assistant, just helping everyone on any non-emotive product searches. yeah, it's going to be really interesting how it plays out. I'm kind of apprehensive, and at the same time, I want to fast forward like 5 years and just see what happens.
Yeah. Speaking of lead gen world as well, it is interesting that we've just been to the second one, but even a year ago, the sort of the difference in people's reactions when you talk about this thing, maybe a year ago, you would say you need to build a brand to lead generators, and it'd sort of be apathetic responses. But even just a year on, you hear people at the forefront of the industry all talking about the need to build a brand, and you can sort of see the difference in people's reaction to this idea even in the space of just 12 months. Yeah.
So I think, and some people, I think it sort of falls in three camps. Ones that don't give a shit and just want to carry on as they are. And I'm almost certain they'll just get swept up by either AI or like their ad cost rising too much. The other is believe you're building a brand, but really you're just creating like landing pages that all have a similar theme, but you're not really doing anything. Then the people are actually genuinely thinking like, how do we create a brand? How do we solve one specific problem for one specific type of person and resonate with them so deeply that they start to recommend other people, and we become the thing they search when that problem occurs. We become associated with the solution.
Yeah. Oh, like I say, very interested in that this idea has cropped up so much, but that was idea. The big idea number 2, the best lead generators build brands. Where are we next?
So idea 3, I don't know if it's an idea or just something someone said. We had Callum Dudley on, and I've thought this for a while, right? I've known it for a number of years, but never really sort of spoken about it. And he came on and said, big brands are turned off by lead gen. So Callum works at Neo Media World's part of WPP agencies. When they have big clients come in, the wheel Callum out, speak about lead generation. And what he noticed is when he mentions lead generation, he sort of visibly sees them shy away. So much so that he actually started using a different phrase like prospects initiative or customer generation or something, and noticed that resonated much more with them. And really, it's like these things that we've been talking about: low barrier to entry, short-term approach, winky wanky brands, celebrating like hustle culture, just being able to bang shit up that doesn't mean anything in like a few minutes. And they're the sort of antithesis of what a brand wants from a partner that they're going to work with. And so I've known this, right? Like we've got a few brands, like global brands that use Dateable. And they use it for like various reasons, right? So it's like connecting APIs, connecting to their CRM, validating, qualifying data. But one of them is, if I speak to them, they don't trust the sources of data coming in, as in they don't trust necessarily the partners that they're working with. What they look at is when they look into the lead gen industry. By lead gen industry, I mean companies whose primary revenue comes from either buying, selling, or generating leads. But all the biggest advertisers and actually the biggest buyers of leads don't exist in the lead gen industry. They exist outside it. So when they look in, they just see like murkiness because they don't trust it. They don't understand it fully. And that's ultimately why they shy away from it to some degree, or feel like they need protection from it, or don't count themselves in the lead gen industry. So I think if we change the perception of the lead gen industry so that we actually celebrated the people far more who are carrying out really good practices, stop looking at technology that was just to do with like ripping consumers off and trying to make as much money as possible, looked at like the lead buyers that are transparent, the lead sellers that are transparent, big brands would want to be far more associated with the lead gen industry. I think what would happen is if the lead gen industry became the vanguard of how a company builds a relationship with a consumer via their data from a really sort of from a commercial standpoint, but moral, best of breed or excellence way, and how lead generation should really be practiced. Yeah, I think every advertiser on earth would be in it. Why wouldn't they? But instead, we don't. What we've actually got is, not that the lead gen industry is bad, but this comes on to another point that we'll mention. It's basically got as many bad elements in it as it has good. But when you look from the outside in, you don't see that. You just see murkiness because you can't separate it. At the talk that I did at Lead Gen World, the way I reference this is that the building industry 20 years ago, half the building industry was made of cowboy builders, just used to, put shoddy walls up and you could never trust anybody. And half of it was made of builders who would actually do a really good job. But as a consumer wanting to get a builder, you never knew which one you were going to get. You couldn't trust anyone. And so the whole building industry had a really bad name. They used to make shows about it constantly. They don't do them anymore. Cowboy builders and I don't know, my builder ate my cat or something. And the lead gen industry is viewed in the same way by a lot of brands that could actually benefit from the services of the lead gen industry.
Quite a good idea for a show, actually. If we had the time to do it, we could just do cowboy generators and expose people. If we had the means. And
what about lead generator ate my cat?
Yeah, we can work on the branding at a later point, but yeah, that'd be quite good if we could suddenly name and shame people who are doing this stuff. You hinted at it there though. Let's seamlessly segue into point 4, because how people respond to this idea is almost, well, you introduce it because I think it's important.
So I think is that the lead gen industry is split in two.
Yeah.
I think it's quite a strong separation line. And it's made up of lead buyers, lead sellers, and technology on one side that don't really have any interest in helping consumers, aren't really bothered about helping each other. They just want to make money. The whole thing's designed to make money in the short term, but not build partnerships, potentially, not be transparent in a lot of ways, and just go after like really short-term gains based on exploitation in one way or another. And then you have the other side, which are genuinely transparent, want to build trusted relationships, looking for long-term partnerships and long-term visions of businesses and things. And ultimately, they want to sort of help consumers. They want to create good customer journeys. So an analogy of this would be like, I don't know, a spreadsheet. If we're talking about like, you can go into several elements. There's technology. So if we look at technology, and an analogy would be a spreadsheet. So, I don't know. Accountants use spreadsheets. So do drug dealers.
Right.
But imagine building a spreadsheet. If Microsoft specifically built a spreadsheet to help drug dealers sell more drugs or benefiting them in some way. Imagine like the uproar that it'd be. But that is ultimately some of the technology that exists in the lead gen industry and isn't batted an eyelid at, which exploits consumers. Like its ultimate design is to not give consumers the best deal, but make whoever's licensing the technology the most amount of money possible. So yeah, great in the short term, but either regulations, people catch on, someone's being exploited. That's the issue with it. And it's the sort of the same thing with like lead generators that aren't being transparent. Someone is being exploited. Whether it's the lead buyer, the consumer, whoever it is, there is an element of exploitation of someone's data, and potentially a manipulation or a hiding of the truth. Can have the same on the lead buying side, where they're doing something other than what someone's expecting. The consumer isn't getting the experience they want. They're not paying for leads, they're falsifying rejections. There's a whole side to it which exists. And there's no law protecting against any of this yet. I think there probably will, or there are elements which, you know, are beginning to get frowned upon. The law's like really far behind with this stuff. And then on the other side, it's like all the companies that don't do all that stuff and actually, you know, build good practices, lead sellers that are transparent, lead buyers that do what they say they're going to do and provide feedback and whatever else. So that's where the split is.
I don't expect you to answer this question because there's no way of being able to answer this question. But what is your gut reaction when I asked you, where is that split? Like, is it 50-50? Is it 90-10? Like,
no, yeah, I'd say it's 50-50. Yeah. This is the issue why if you're a big brand looking in from the outside, going back to the previous point, you don't go, oh, well, that's fine. The lead gen industry is split in two. You go, something's fucking dodgy going on in there, and I can't tell who's doing what dodgy. And everybody suffers from it. Because if you're building a really great lead gen brand, you are transparent, you can be trusted, you want long-term partnerships, you effectively are still being associated with this like murky industry. And I actually mentioned this in the talk with. The problem is because everybody's saying we're transparent, we can be trusted, we're not shysters like the rest, everyone ends up sounding exactly the same. Yeah. So by definition, when you look from the outside in, you go, well, the guy who ripped us off said that. You're like, it's a strange one.
Well, this is the whole point with like the building analogy. Back in the day, like there was no way of knowing who was good and who was bad. So every single dodgy rogue cowboy trader out there essentially harmed every good one. That's the problem, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's what's really funny is I believe that you can almost tell. There's a single thing that will help you tell which side of the fence someone sits on, I believe, and it's exactly the same as the cowboy builder, which is they don't actually care about a consumer's data. And by care about it, I mean like literally, you know, they don't particularly, they're not overly worried about security. They'll do it just because they wouldn't be able to sell leads otherwise. But they're not particularly bothered about exploiting people in any way. And that is, and all it is using someone's data rather than, you know, turning up at a house with like tarmacking tools or something and ripping them off by doing half their drive. But ultimately, having now, I've been in this industry for a long time, 16 years. I've spent a lot of time dealing with huge amounts of different companies, from cowboy lead generators, cowboy lead buyers, agencies that have ripped companies off for thousands. And I've spent a lot of time dealing with really great companies who have great buyers, great lead generators, great agencies. And that is 100% where the line is drawn. It's to do with ripping people off, like whether they feel comfortable doing it or not.
Yeah. I feel like that's looking at what exists now. Like you say, it's a present tense thing. It's currently split in two. But I could just sort of see where we're heading to this final point. What does the future look like?
So I think really strong partnerships between lead buyers and lead sellers. And what's funny is we've been talking about this for the last 2 years, right? Or two and a bit years this podcast has been going. And I would be amazed if virtually every single podcast that we've had hasn't mentioned that in some way. And it comes back to the top point of the transparency. But I think the key is to try and build long-term partnerships. Because what we're really talking about here is a marketing team on the lead generation side and a sales team on the lead buyer side. And you've got to find a way that these two disparate, non-connected entities can work together to create a seamless experience for a consumer. And the only way you can do that is via transparency, trust, and a long-term partnership that just increases the strength of its offering over time. So because it gets optimized and efficient, basically. So I think it'll be interesting to look back in like another 2 years, if we do 200 episodes, or when we get to 200 episodes, and go a recap of this and say, have partnerships strengthened? I think in the last 2 years they probably have. Actually, a lot of partnerships have strengthened. I remember a time when lead gen companies would just be like set up 1 week and they'd disappear 6 months later. There seems to be less of that now. There's definitely companies that are sort of standing the test of time, and that suggests that they're building strong long-term partnerships. They're not just going after short-term approaches and things.
Yeah. Well, if we get to 200 today, a question. I think the fact we've got to 100 was in doubt, because we seem to we got to 99 maybe 3-4 weeks ago, and then we've had a little break, which I don't think we've done the whole time we're doing it. We've never gone more than 2 weeks without a podcast, and then I don't know whether it's just this idea we had to get to 100 and before we carried on. It wasn't that. It wasn't like a deliberate thing. It was just that, like you say, we had.
I think COVID. Yeah, I had COVID. We had
you had COVID.
The conference we had to go, and we had like all this vortex of bank holidays and stuff that happened around,
and a coronation thrown into
the coronation. Well. Yeah, I think it was just that, and you went on holiday, so I think it was those just force majeure drove us to 4 weeks.
But I say we power through, and from here on in, hopefully we'll get back to the consistent output of a podcast a week. But it's nice we've done that. That was episode 100, 5 biggest ideas we've come across in 100 episodes. Thanks for listening to the B2C Lead Generation podcast. Be sure to hit subscribe to hear more from those at the very cutting edge of the lead gen world.